Greetings. This is Gail Anderson. I'm here with my husband, Kirby.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, Kirby. In case you don't know it, we do blog at kirbyanderson.com, and the link is in the profile. Right now, since the first of the year, my husband's been doing a weekly video blog by popular request. That was what most people said they would prefer. That way they could listen while doing other things, and those have been a big hit. But we blog on all kinds of things. You can just go onto the site and type in or click on marriage, parenting, health, personal development, and see all the wealth of information that we have in blogs under each one of those topics. Now, this is Mentoring Moments for Moms. I usually get on either with my husband or by myself talking about a lot of the things that affect moms, parents, stuff like that. We've been in a little period of time here where we've been talking about the teenage years, and I discussed how to prepare your kids for those the other day. So that was yesterday, I guess. So you can listen to that. Today, I've asked Kirby to get on here because over the years, we either developed on our own or heard from other people some key events that are great in being able to prepare your kids for the whole change as well as throughout the change in the teenage years. And that's what I've asked him to talk about today. So I hope these are things that you all will consider doing with your teens to help you all through that time. So let's just talk about those events.
Well, maybe just review again. The big thing that you hit yesterday, which you did a really good job on, is again this whole idea of what we're wanting to do here, especially when the kids are preteens, is to help prepare them and open up a conversation to keep the channels of communication open so that you have the opportunity of being able to speak into their lives, particularly at a time when there are all these changes that are going on. And it can get a little bit unruly.
Very.
Most people kind of are afraid of when their kids are going to come into their teenage years, and maybe they have an image of when they grew up and it wasn't so great in their home. But it doesn't have to be that way.
It was really crazy in our home when our eldest was 18. The youngest, numbers 4 and 5, the twins were actually 12. So we felt like we had the whole gamut of teenage years all at once. Very interesting.
And yet it really, I don't have a bad image of that time. I mean, there's always challenges because it can be kind of a wild time. There's a lot of change that's going on. And the most important thing that we're stressing at that age that we desired and that we encourage other parents to enjoy is to be able to become their child's life coach. And we genuinely believe that there is nobody who has greater potential to being the best life coach for a child than the parents. And God gave them to you, and He's going to equip you to be able to be who they need to be. So that's all well and good, and Gail shared some great stuff yesterday that were all just a lot of great information on key points of this. But like most things, we can be very well intentioned and think that somewhere along the line we're going to share these things with our kids or whatever. And you may be good about that with the first one and maybe the second one possibly. But after a while it gets lost. Life gets busy.
Oh my.
So what we find is that most of the things that are really important, if you don't schedule certain mile marker events or block out time for these things, they just don't happen. And so we came up with a series of events, and we're just going to talk about two of the main ones today that were really helpful for us in building this relationship with our kids and it making a huge difference. And these two events, again, made sure that we did cover a big part of this material in one spot that we could keep referring back to. And number two is it allowed us to make it special. That it wasn't just kind of a casual conversation, that this was like a big deal. And when you create a context for it,
yes,
it really makes it
very special.
Very special, and it underscores the importance of what you're trying to teach to them. So again, the two trips, preteen trip at age 10 for us was that, and then a special dinner out and a promise ring at the age of 13. And just to give you a little bit of explanation on both of those, At age 10, we did an overnight trip with our son or daughter. I would take, if it was a boy, I would take my son out for a camping trip, or generally it was almost always camping. And when the girls got to that age, she took them out to a hotel. And that was their roughing it. But we made it just a great time, a lot of fun stuff, but it was the whole 24-hour period basically was just woven with some great conversation. And we would use this as a time, since they hadn't really gone through a lot of their adolescent changes yet. They didn't have a lot of these wide emotional swings, and they pretty much still thought that we knew everything. So we capitalized on that. And what we used in order to build even more credibility was to begin to talk to them about changes that were coming down the pike in the next couple of years.
Such a key.
And it was so exciting to them to talk about these things, but we'd also be able to explain, sometimes this stuff brings about different emotions. You're not always sure how to handle that. You're going to imagine certain things. And what we wanted to do was to establish credibility up front by predicting these things almost prophetically.
Yes.
And so that when they came about, we could say, remember, we talked about this. Particularly what we did throughout all of this was begin to plant the seed of you're changing. You're going to start becoming a young man, a young woman, an adult. And God has placed us in your life to help you through those transitions. So remember, I'm not your enemy, I'm your coach. I'm your life coach. And whenever we would get in the next couple of years, as they would start changing, they would look back and they would think like we were just against them. We could just remind them, remember we talked about this. We're not your enemy, we're your coach. So that began the conversation, and we would talk about sexuality as well as physical changes that were going to happen and things like that. And 10-year-old today is probably
a lot further along than they were back when our kids were young.
You're probably going to be layering some of these conversation on an as-needed basis, and only what they're asking questions for up till that point in time. But certainly at that time was a very concentrated time when we began to talk on a little deeper level, and that was important to him.
And can I add something here?
Please.
I liked to take their birthday as the date to remind me to have another of these layering conversations, where it didn't need to be an overnight where I took them away, but it might be a special afternoon where we went to a park, walked, or even a lunch, where we would go out and just kind of touch base. Hey, we've talked about this stuff last year and during the year, and where are we at now? What questions do you have? Can we explore the subject a little bit more? And just leave yourself that time to where you can answer their questions. That is one of the biggest things, is that you be available to either answer their questions or find out the answer for them, so they feel the comfort in coming to you with anything.
Yep. So again, you start this conversation, you have little checkpoints along the way, birthdays, and then of course that's not the only time you're talking. You might have we like to have weekly special times and all those kind of things. But we're talking about big key mile marker events. Mm-hmm. So the preteen trip really was probably the first of those. The next major one was at age 13. And at that point in time, you're assuming that, pretty much they've gone through all of the physical changes, hormones are starting to change and kick in. Well, but you're well into it enough that things are changing enough. And so at age 13, we had another one, and it was just kind of this special dinner where we would take them out for a really big deal dinner. It wasn't just fast food or whatever. And in the course of this, we would talk again about some of the things that we talked about at the preteen trip. Talking about where they were at right now, how that they were becoming young men, young women, that additional responsibility, and also just about the importance of conducting themselves and maintaining their sexual purity. And so we would cast this vision for why this is so good. And from our standpoint, it was from a biblical perspective, from our worldview, talking about that, the pros and cons, the benefits of doing so. And it would always be a thing of, is that what you desire to do? And yes, that's what we wanted to do. Then we would present them with a special promise ring, or some people call it a purity ring or whatever. And it was something that they would wear, kind of like a wedding ring. It just reminded you of this promise that you're making, not to your spouse at that time, obviously, but to yourself. And making a covenant and just saying, this is what I'm going to do. With God's help, I'm going to keep myself sexually pure and till I'm married, and be able to have maintained that chastity until that time. So that was another great event. And from there on, it was just weekly touch points.
Yeah.
And of course, we had some other things when they would graduate and whatever. But those are the two biggies.
Right.
What I leave out?
Well, just at 16, we also made it another time for just an overnight,
Yep.
which was more fun than anything.
Yes.
Wasn't any huge talk, but again, it was that time where you could just make available for your children to just talk, just you and she,
Yep.
you and he, however, and answer questions, just have time together. Your relationship is so important during this time because that's the basis for them allowing you to be their coach, as well as to ask those questions that they might not normally be asking their parents.
Yeah.
They might be going to their friends too. So,
And of course, all this doesn't just start at 10. Hopefully,
No.
in the childhood, you're building up such a great relational equity that just catapults you to the next level. And when you transition this way through the teenage years, really what you're doing is just setting up, again, more relational equity, so that after they leave home, that they're still coming back to you. My desire
That's right.
is that I was always the first one that they'd run to, whether they're in trouble or they got something good to share. And for the most part, that still reigns true, and that's something that, boy, you just really, really treasure.
absolutely. Next week, I'm going to get into a little bit on dating and how I went through that process, walking my kids through that whole thing. Some book recommendations will be very helpful, but I'll do that earlier in the week, and I don't know what we're doing later in the week. But
I'll wait for your orders.
yeah, I also want to mention that when I put this on YouTube today, today's scope, which should be later on today, I'll also put a link in there for a list of recommended reading that you can use for this preteen overnight, or just for your time with your teens. All kinds of great books. I know one of the big eye-openers to me was Secret Keeper by Dana Gresh. Got a hold of that, read that with my girls, and it was really an eye-opener for me, but it was really key in going through that process with the girls as they were teenagers. So I recommend highly that if you're interested at all in what we've talked about today, that you click on that link. I've got links to purchase the books on Amazon, so have at it. So anything else you want to add?
Nope, I think that was good. A lot of good stuff you've got there on that list.
Okay, so
Hope that's helpful.
and we will be on next week and talking a little bit about dating. So hope you all have an awesome day, and thanks for watching.
See ya.